All right, good evening, everybody. Today is November 3rd, 2021. This is the regular City Commission meeting for the City of Oregon City. And I'm going to call this meeting to order at this point. Mr. Weiler, will you please call the roll?
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell.
Here.
Commissioner Denise McGriff.
Present.
Commissioner Rocky Smith.
Here.
Commissioner Adam Marl.
Here.
And Mayor Rachel Lyle Smith.
Here. All right, will you all please stand and join with me in the flag salute? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, so the first item we have is a proclamation honoring Oregon City's fallen officers, Robert Lipke and George Hanlon. I would like to read that proclamation. Whereas law enforcement is an honorable, hardworking profession that diligently seeks to make our community more livable and safe. And whereas there is no greater sacrifice an officer can make for their community than to give their life. And whereas the death of a police officer shocks the very soul of a community, our government and the very freedoms the officers have sworn to protect. And whereas the impact of this tragedy upon the officer's family, friends, department, and community is immeasurable. And whereas our hearts and thoughts go out to the many killed in action while serving to protect our community. Now, therefore, I, Rachel Lyle Smith, Mayor of the City of Oregon City, along with the City Commission and the citizens of Oregon City, extend heartfelt condolences to the families of the following officers. Reserve Police Officer Robert Lipke, lost on November 3rd, 2013. And Police Officer George J. Hanlon, lost on April 23rd, 1906. These officers have been lost but will never be forgotten. This community will be forever grateful. We ask for a moment of silence as we remember Oregon City's valuable public servants and pray for healing and hope into the future. All right, thank you. All right, I got choked up over that. And I've read that one before. I read it last year, I believe. But it hits home. We value our law enforcement, and I hope that they know that. I think they do. I've talked to them on a regular basis, and I know the City Commission supports our law enforcement, and I know that they know that. And I think our community knows that. So, and I saw that your post about going to the site this afternoon, and I was reminded about the two officers. So I think it's really honorable that we take a moment to never forget, and it's important to our community. And I know our community loves these families, and so thank you. All right, so now we get to move on to a swearing-in ceremony for our brand new municipal court judge. Her name is Amy Lindgren. So this is a very exciting event for us. And I will move down to do this in person. All right, checking this microphone.
Wait, where should we stand? Okay. Can I take my mask? Okay. I'll remember, just go in short phrases.
I will. All right. I, Amy B. Lindgren.
I, Amy B. Lindgren.
Do solemnly swear.
Do solemnly swear.
That I will support the Constitution of the United States.
That I will support the Constitution of the United States.
And the state of Oregon.
And the state of Oregon.
And that I will, to the best of my ability.
And that I will, to the best of my ability.
Faithfully perform the duties
faithfully perform the duties
of the office of the Municipal Presiding Judge of Oregon City
of the office of the Municipal Presiding Judge of Oregon City
during my incumbency thereof.
during my incumbency thereof.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
For all of the work that she's going to do in our judge, in our courtroom. That was a very quick ceremony, wasn't it? We're thrilled to have Miss Amy Lindgren join us as an employee, and we're excited. Welcome aboard. Welcome to the city, and I know you're going to do great things. So, all right. And with that, we will move on in our agenda to citizen comments. As we transition, if you guys want to exit, feel free to. We've done this before. We know how it is. Thank you. Have a good night. All right, so for citizen comments, I have two. First up, we have Mr. Doug Neely. Come on up. You'll have 3 minutes. Please say your name and city for the record.
Doug Neely, Oregon City resident. Initially, I was wanting just to stay for the proclamation recognizing officers Libke and Hanlon. Officer Lipke was killed shortly after I took on the term of mayor, and it was a very difficult time for me and for the officers and the family. But I also did want to step up and not necessarily make that my statement, but I also wanted to compliment the city on Molalla Boulevard's reconstruction. It's far safer in terms of pedestrian. You have two well-marked pedestrian crosswalks between Highway 213 and Fur, where there was nothing there before. It was an extremely dangerous street for pedestrians, and it's a tremendous job that the city and the contractors have done there at that location, and it seems to me the traffic is flowing very, very well, especially with those two dedicated left turns to take people onto Beaver Creek onto 213.
All right, thank you, Mr. Neely. I'm sure Mr. Lewis was very happy to hear that comment since we're ready to wrap up that Molalla Avenue project. All right, the next public comment we have is Ms. Karen Ellis. And before you start, I'll turn to City Manager Tony Conkle.
Thank you, Mayor, and I'd like to thank Ms. Ellis for coming out tonight. We had some email correspondence back and forth. She did want to come and have a chance to speak about mental health and post-traumatic stress disorder in the law enforcement community. I did propose, I know she's got a lot that she wants to say, and typically I realize our citizen comment is 3 minutes. In talking with her, I had offered that I thought that the commission would be open to hearing for 5 minutes from her. So I hope you find that acceptable moving forward.
All right, thank you, Mr. Conkle. And I don't see any objections by the commission. It's general consent to make changes. So thank you. You'll have 5 minutes. Can you state your name and city for the record?
Karen Ellis.
You'll have to scoot closer.
I'm Karen Ellis, and I live in Happy Valley.
Can you, Commissioner Smith, just to check, did you guys hear her? Just want to make sure. Okay, perfect.
8 years ago today, November 3rd, 2013, Paul 22 and a reserve officer, along with Paul 23, responded to a call for service. I'm sorry. The call began as an assist fire and quickly spiraled into something far more traumatic and life-altering. A man tormenting his girlfriend, his neighbor, and her grandchildren turned into shots fired, officer down. What followed was a neighborhood locked down and flooded by nearly every agency in Clackamas County and the Portland metro area. Most in this community clearly know the reserve officer was Robert Lipke. The names that many may not be as familiar with are Paul 23, Officer Jared Turpin, and Paul 22, Officer Sean Ellis. I am Mrs. Paul 22. My name is Karen Ellis, and Sean is my husband of 19 years. He is more than a badge or an employee number. He is my husband, my best friend, the dad to our two boys, a brother, a friend, a son, and a man with a servant's heart. Sean did not join me here today, as it is too painful to come to a place that not only bears the reminders by name and bronze boots of the worst day of his life, but is located 3 blocks from the scene. So I'm before you today because Sean is suffering from chronic post-traumatic stress disorder, sustained in the line of duty throughout his years of service to this community. That day in 2013 was more than likely the first traumatic brain injury to his psyche when I noticed him begin to change. It was then followed by 5 years in the detective unit where he investigated murder, abuse, sex abuse of children as young as infants, the physical assault of an infant only weeks old, which led to the baby's death on Easter Day. 5 years investigating some of the darkest evil, the ugliness of society. In the summer of 2016, Sean was assigned to investigate child pornography cases. If you do not know what those investigations entail, the short answer is he had to view these evil, filthy images and videos and provide detailed written description of what he saw in reports to the district attorney's office. Then read these same reports aloud to the grand jury as the jurors cry, hearing the horror inflicted on children. This is some of the darkness the general public doesn't know our officers endure. They walk the thin blue line between darkness and light, so the public doesn't have to walk it or even know about it. The toll this took on Sean was brutally obvious to me. I begged him to ask his supervisor about removing him from this awful task, and he just said, then someone else will have to do it, and why subject anyone to that? It's horrible. Not only did he do it for the victims, but he did it so another officer would not have to. That is the heart of a servant, to sacrifice himself for others. This is how Sean approached police work since 2006. With his detective assignment complete in 2019, he went back to the road as a patrolman. On a night in February 2020, a domestic violence call dispatched. Sean was writing reports in the squad room when the transmission came over the radio. With several officers available to go, Sean remained typing and listened to the call until the hairs on the back of his neck went up and his gut told him to go. As he arrived on scene, shots fired came over the radio. He grabbed his rifle and began running, sprinting in full gear, rifle in hand. Sean tripped on the broken sidewalk and fell to the ground, damaging his left knee. Though I don't think he realized it at the time, it took him back to this day in 2013 and all the horrible images and feelings that haunt him. The knee injury kept him home, unable to work for months. I watched the mood swings become greater, the night terrors return, anxiety heightened, and the deafening silence that surrounded him and hung so thick in our home. Until something would set him off, and the storm that filled that silence came like a freight train. All of this in the midst of a pandemic and a year where the world has turned upside down, everything in divide. Here we are 20 months later with the knowledge that Sean has run out of paid time off and that city policies and the union contract don't truly address duty injuries such as these, long-term and debilitating. He was a good steward of his sick and vacation time, so he had a cushion to do his healing. Well, his cushion is now gone, and with that, he has been classified inactive and unpaid. He will no longer be able to provide salary or benefits to our family because his treatment has essentially gone too long. Out of time, out of luck, no matter duty-related or not. The hole between city policies and the union contract somehow allowed the city to use 100% of his PTO, but only gave him a paycheck for 1/3, while workers' compensation pays the other 2/3. If his PTO had been applied in the manner he was being paid, he would likely have 1 more year of treatment and recovery. As it is now, he loses his livelihood, his medical benefits, the ability to support our family, as he has always done, all because he did his job, did it honorably, and sacrificed for this community. Sadly, it seems it doesn't matter that the job is what irreparably harmed him. There seems to be little care for the human and the sacrifice, a sacrifice that our family pays as well. While Sean fights every day to recover, I don't believe this huge hole in the system is malicious at all. It does need to be addressed, and I think with education and awareness, it can be. PTSD is not a broken wrist or even Sean's knee injury that could allow him to come back to light duty. It is much more. Will Sean ever fully recover and return to policing? Will he recover enough for another type of job? We have no idea at this point. There is no formula for this, as everyone's brains are different. What we do know is our life and recovery are day by day, hour by hour. This has altered our entire family and way of life. Our boys don't remember what Sean was like before PTSD descended on our home. But they know that they have to adjust to Dad's bad days. They apologize when they accidentally drop something. They warn him if they are going to do something loud. They don't sneak up or stand behind him. They are learning where he needs to sit in a restaurant or public place. The joy Sean once had for watching our boys play sports has been taken from him as he struggles in the crowds, the noise, and the chaos. This is a terrible consequence of doing this job, the price paid for the acute and repeated exposure to trauma. To watch your loved one struggle, to suffer an illness no one can see and very few can comprehend, is absolutely and utterly heartbreaking. First responders deserve to be cared for when they can no longer serve due to life-altering duty injury. It is a sacrifice that should be acknowledged and honored. The call to action is uncertain and will require sharing the burden. As for us, Sean will continue to do what is required for recovery, and I will continue to care for him and our family. I will advocate for him and our boys. I will answer questions about this illness honestly. I will be a resource for other officers, their families, and departments. I will educate and advocate for those suffering from PTSD. Officers, please take care of yourselves. Take your vacations. Make time for what brings you joy in your off time to balance out the ugly despair and evil you see on duty. Watch each other, not just on calls, but in the aftermath of them. Look for the toll the job is taking on your minds and bodies. Lean into your loved ones. Don't shut them out, thinking you are protecting them. Call timeout if you have to. Sean asked for the lifeline before PTSD caused an avoidable error. I believe it is the bravest thing he has ever done in life and career. The sooner you take care of an injury will give you the best chance of recovery. PTSD is not just a psychological injury, but a physiological one that changes your chemistry, your neural connections, and the way your body responds to stimulus. Your brain has muscle memory. It does what it needs to survive and can get stuck in the dysfunctional state of fight or flight. Some recover, some don't. So take care and be mindful of what your body is telling you. It will tell you long before you consciously know. Madam Mayor, commissioners, police, and city administrators, the stigma is real, and you have the power to bring light to it, to something that matters, that could change a community, change a life, or even save one. This could be a turning point in your service and legacy. Help find a way to fill and bridge the holes that could help care for the officers that serve this community. It may be too late for Sean and our family to see any positive changes made, but if even one officer can benefit from our experiences, That matters tremendously to us. As Numbers 11:17 states, they shall bear the burden of the people with you, so that you will not bear it all alone.
That's okay. Thank you, Ms. Ellis. I appreciate those comments, and I'm sure our community does too. I know there's a lot that our law enforcement officers deal with that we go about living our lives and don't even know that it happens, but they deal with the worst of our society. And they have to go back and forth between good moments and then swing complete 180 to terrible moments. And, you know, we definitely owe them a lot of gratitude. I know Chief Ban asked me about a month ago, jokingly, do you want to become a police officer? I need some more police officers. And I was like, no way, no way. I have so much respect for them, and I don't think I could possibly do the job. I hope that you will continue your advocacy. I'm sure there's work that can be done in this area, and we love our police department, and we certainly want to support our officers. Any comments from anybody else before we move on this topic?
Thank you for coming in.
Yeah, I think it's important for our community to hear what it's like for the families of law enforcement officers. And like I said, a lot of people don't know. And so sharing your story certainly helps the message, and it helps get the message out there. And, you know, like as much as we can to support our law enforcement officers, OCPD, we definitely want to do it. So, all right. Thank you for coming in. I appreciate it. All right.
We do have two Zoom public comment.
Oh, okay. I didn't. We have two more public comments. So I see Ms. Liz Hannum. Is she one of them? Okay.
Hi, I'm Liz Hannum. I'm the executive director for Downtown Oregon City Association, and I think wants to introduce herself. Kelly.
Hi, I'm Kelly Upkeys. I'm the current board president for Downtown Oregon City Association.
So we're coming tonight to talk to you about the courthouse plaza. We're starting to get concerned. We have a lot of events in that public space, and unfortunately that is the only public space in all of downtown. And so what we're asking of the city is to start the conversation to see if we can continue to make that a public space going forward, even as the new courthouse is developed and the old courthouse is redeveloped. Because we do a lot of things in that support activity downtown. Just looking at some of our numbers from 2019, obviously, from events, we had more than 27,000 people that attended our events, and that didn't include car shows and antique fairs and all of that. And then we gathered information about how much people were spending on those days, and just our events brought in more than $500,000 in spending at restaurants and retail businesses. And so we're hoping that we can continue that process. Kelly, did you have anything to add?
Sorry, not at this time. I just think it's a conversation that needs to get going. Even though we have time before that courthouse moves, we need to start planning that now.
Yeah, so the goal for us is to continue to make it a public space. And so if the city can start a conversation with the county to make sure that stays a public space, no matter what developer comes in to redevelop either the law library or the courthouse, we would really appreciate it.
Okay. Is that it? Did Kelly have something else? No. Okay.
Parallel Smith is Mr. on the CC?
Who?
Mr. Reed, Kendall Reed.
I don't know. I can't see the list anymore. I thought I saw Mr. Reed join?
Oh, he is. Oh, thank you, Jacob. He is here. So the only comment I wanted to make about it is that obviously if that's to remain a public space, I would like to make sure that Mr. Reed is brought into the discussions, and also the Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee. So thank you for coming in and talking about this and alerting us to that.
Yes, I know I've talked to the county chair, 2D Smith, about the county courthouse moving. So I think there will be some future opportunities as a minimum as part of that conversation to ask about that property and talk about it. So thank you for bringing that forward, Ms. Hannum. Jacob,
Thank you.
Do we have someone else? Or it was those two?
Just the two.
Okay. All right, thank you, Kelly. All right, so I think that's it for citizen comment, and we will move on to presentations in our agenda with an update on the shower trailers. Mr. Conkle, the staff report was yours. Are you providing a presentation, or? Oh, there's Brandy. I see her on the screen now. I assume Brandy, Brandy, are you gonna give the presentation update?
Yes, I have the information. Thank you. So our last report was in May. I don't recall at that time if we were still on a weekly schedule or a every other week schedule, but that's what we're at right now, the second and fourth Sundays. We provided 111 showers. 49 folks came by for resources only. Generally speaking, those are housed folks who just need a little bit of assistance, whether that's a meal or hygiene supplies. I would like to spotlight our volunteers. The Oregon City community has been just phenomenal. We had 49 volunteers make those showers possible. And that's a lot of hours that they've dedicated to creating a welcoming space for folks who have some needs. We received a referral from the school district. They sent a family our way when their water heater quit working, so we were able to provide showers to a family. So there are a range of folks accessing those services on Sundays. I know that Commissioner O'Donnell appreciates numbers toward what are we doing substantively to help folks. So I did make sure that I had those numbers also. Since our last update, we've made referrals for 14 folks into housing. That's not to say we only had 14 folks who were ready to move in. That's to say those were the actual connections we were able to make with the resources for housing available in Clackamas County, which I think we all can agree is a bit on short supply. But 14 folks have either gone into transitional or long-term housing. And Live One has been able to walk alongside additional case managers, whether that's law enforcement assisted diversion or whomever the other organization is that's working with them. And we've provided household supplies and furniture and just help folks adjust because that can be quite an adjustment period. We have been attending the Oregon City Homeless Coordination meeting that Officer Haynes convenes and Chief Band and Mayor Lyle Smith was out the week before last. And that has created a really great venue for ongoing conversation about not only the work that we're doing to address the needs of the folks who are unhoused, but the needs of the folks who are impacted by unhoused folks in Oregon City. So businesses, the Parks Department, library, the whole range of services that make our city ebb and flow and be what it is. So that's been a really beneficial engagement for us. We have received no concerns or complaints from neighboring residents or the neighborhood association during this recent reporting period. We were invited to provide an update at the July 13th Berkeley Hills Neighborhood Association. We had a lovely time at the cemetery with them. We brought along the owners of Brack's Laundry, which was formerly Carousel, and were able to introduce them to the neighborhood. And we talked about our plans to resume laundry events in Oregon City, which we haven't been able to do for about 3 years now. And that is anticipated for probably January. That looks like the schedule that they're on for reopening is probably sometime in December. We also were able to bring the shower cart to the July 31st Oregon City Farmers Market and do additional community outreach. It was actually I was surprised by the number of people who were very curious about what the shower cart looked like inside and out and how it ran. So we had a great interaction with the crowd at the farmers market that day. We joined with Rotary and with Second Home for students experiencing houselessness that need a safe place to stay so that they can continue their education. So the three of us teamed up and had a booth that was generously donated by the farmers market. We continue to have neighborhood residents and others stop by just to say hello, thank you, make a donation, hang out, take a tour. We had some folks come by and bring their RC cars, which is always entertaining. A game of football in the parking lot one Sunday. And we also have had more folks who we used to serve in their houseless capacity who are now housed come back and volunteer with us because it's still their community, still the folks that they want to spend time with. And so we've had a number of folks come back and do that, which has been really impactful, not just for me, but for all of our volunteers. And we've also had more people who have needed to complete community service hours sign up to volunteer. So community court participants, municipal court participants, as well as employees and students who need those volunteer hours. And so those are getting filled as well.
Okay, thank you, Randy. That was a very comprehensive update and lots of great news. I'm looking to the commissioners. Anybody have any questions for Brandy?
Zero.
Nope. All right, seeing none. I know this was a presentation, but the staff report reads like you're looking for a decision or approval for the continued use. Is that, we need a vote on this?
We could have a vote or consensus. I think, we've been providing at the request of the commission 6 month updates. Ms. Johnson has been bringing those back. If that's something that the commission would like to continue to see, we can certainly do that. We've been working with them to try to identify, obviously, we've stopped declaring a COVID emergency in Oregon City, even though we're still dealing with COVID. So the way we're addressing this is that we still consider COVID to be going on and working with them to consider to continue to utilize their shower facilities in the community since it has been going well. So really, we're just looking for, would the commission like to see another update? Or if there are concerns, we'd love to hear them and we can bring that back and have a discussion.
Gotcha. For me, this item is no longer paired with COVID. I think this is just a need that's in our community to serve a population in our community. But that's just my opinion. I think Love One and the other services that are joining her by people showing up, providing food. There's a number of other services where it has expanded to create trust and to really try to help individuals that are coming. So it's really turned into a great event. I think it's up to the commission. I feel like it's been running pretty smoothly. I think we initially started 6 month updates because we want to take it for a spin and see how it went, if we had any problems, get feedback from the neighborhood. The neighborhood association has provided, no negative comments. And I know that they're vocal enough that if there were problems, they would be in here telling us about that. So I guess the question is here, I personally don't know that I need to see an update. I like hearing the update, but I can probably get that from Brandy via her newsletters and by talking to others. So what's the pleasure of the commission of approving the continued use of temporary shower trailers and or Love One continuing to provide 6 month updates? Do you have any opinions, thoughts? Commissioner McGriff?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Lyle Smith. I think it's a good thing to get the updates because I think there are many in the community that don't know about this still. And I think it's a good opportunity to trumpet successes. We don't spend enough time talking about the things that are going well We talk a lot about the things that aren't going well, and we get told about what's not going well, but very seldom do people like to brag about something. And I don't mean brag in a crass way, I mean in a positive way. And having this on our radar, and people can go back, and if they're looking at it, they will see this. And I think it's really important to continue to talk about the positivity that continues to occur in this community. There's so many things that are negative that I think it's appropriate. I think that the other thing that comes to my mind is the other services. And I have something to talk to inform the commission about it on our communications that involves this very topic, not Love One specifically, but coordinated services, that sort of thing for our houseless community members. So I appreciate the information, Brandy, and I just want you to continue to do the good work.
Thank you.
Commissioner Smith or Commissioner O'Donnell, any comments or thoughts before or a motion? Commissioner Smith?
I agree that I appreciate getting the reports. I don't know that we need it as frequently. I would be okay with a once a year kind of update as we get from our other committees, but I'm open to that.
Commissioner O'Donnell, any thoughts, questions?
Well, I agree with Commissioner McGriff. I think it is the duty of this commission to monitor. I think Brandy and her organization have done a great job, and I'd like to see that continue. I also, as a manager, I live by a philosophy of that which you don't measure, you can improve. So I think measurement is good, and she has given a very thorough report. I'm fine with the 6-month review, and given the thoroughness of what she just did, I don't think we need anything further than that every 6 months. So a job well done, and my compliments to you and your organization.
Thank you.
All right, do we have a motion?
How do you want us to phrase it, that we support continuing the shower facility at the location at Milner Veterinary Clinic, and that we'd appreciate, so I guess it would be twice a year updates?
We'll bring it back on May 4th, 2020, or right around
Perfect.
then. May 4th, 2022.
Perfect.
All right.
If that was a motion, I'll second it.
That was a motion. Motion's been made and seconded. Mr. Wiley?
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell,
Aye.
Commissioner Denise McGriff,
Aye.
Commissioner Rocky Smith,
Aye.
Commissioner Adam Marl,
Aye.
and Mayor Rachel L. Smith.
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right, thank you, Brandy. We appreciate the presentation. Go forth and do
Thank you.
great things. We know you will.
Have a great evening.
You too. All right, we're going to move on to the adoption of the agenda. Does anybody want to pull anything from the consent agenda?
No, I'd like to move the adoption of the consent agenda.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Mr. Wiley?
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell,
Aye.
Commissioner Denise McGriff,
Aye.
Commissioner Rocky Smith,
Aye.
Commissioner Adam Marl,
Aye.
and Mayor Rachel L. Smith.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Mayor Lyle Smith, did you notice on the consent agenda, we do have a new business in town under item 7E, and we welcome them to Oregon City and wish them success. I know the previous, so I guess the name is changing as well, because it was the New China, but maybe it's just called Chinese Cafe Restaurant today, so.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out, I need to look up and see where 904 exactly is. Is it in the same building right
Yes,
there
it's
by
the corner-
Grocery Outlet?
Yeah, it's the corner of Molalla and
Holmes?
Holmes, where by the way, where the cell tower got erected, the one that we went through the review of. So if you happen to be by there and see it, I sent photos to Commissioner O'Donnell when it went up, so he was able to see what it looked like.
All right. Well, I certainly hope they're successful. I love some good Chinese food. All right. So public hearings is our next section on the agenda. The first public hearing we have is 8A. This is the first reading of ordinance number 21-1014 regarding the adoption of a housing needs analysis. My understanding is the city is the applicant in this, so therefore I'm going to open the public hearing first, and then we will move to the staff presentation. Ms. Turway.
Good evening, Laura Turway, Community Development Director for the city. How do we know how much housing we need in the future, and how do we know that we have the zoning and the policies in place where we could potentially meet that housing need? One of the things that we do is have a housing needs analysis, which is a technical study where we take data about housing and forecasts about a variety of things such as demographic and socioeconomic trends to identify what our housing needs will be 20 years from now. And then also understand, using our zoning and policies in place, if we can match that or if we're going to need to adjust things such as land or policies. So this is a technical analysis. The city already has a housing needs analysis from 2002. And so this proposed housing needs analysis will replace that 2002 housing needs analysis as an ancillary document to our comprehensive plan. Even though we look out 20 years, from moving forward from today, we'll have to update that housing needs analysis every 6 years. So you'll see us come back if we need to make course corrections. We have time to do that. This draft housing needs analysis was reviewed by our OC 2040 comprehensive plan update project advisory team. It was referenced in some of our summits as well. It was sent to neighborhood associations for comment, the CIC, development stakeholders group, and then of course there was a joint work session between the Planning Commission and the City Commission in September. The Planning Commission voted unanimously to recommend approval of this document to the City Commission on October 25th. There's a staff report in the packet with some draft findings for the City Commission's consideration, including the applicable criteria such as compliance with our existing comprehensive plan. There's some comments that were in the packet as well, just a couple. I do want to highlight a letter of support from the Housing Land Advocates and Fair Housing Council of Oregon. And with that long introduction, I'm here to send it over to Beth Goodman with Echo Northwest, who is our consultant, and she can walk you through that analysis.
Thank you very much. Thank you for such a great introduction, Laura. I'm assuming that we'll get into, there we go, presentation mode. So Laura just told us a lot about why Oregon City did a housing needs analysis. I also want to mention that this is building off of work that Echo Northwest did for Clackamas County, specifically for Oregon City as part of the Clackamas County housing needs analysis. So it builds off some prior work we did a little while ago. The study aims to answer the question, does Oregon City have enough buildable residential land to accommodate the next 20 years of growth? And if not, what are the city's unmet housing needs? Next slide, please. We talk about housing in the concept and the construct of different types of housing. So for instance, we've got 4 types here: single family detached, things like manufactured homes and cottage housing are included under there. Single family attached, so townhouses. Multifamily with duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes. And then multifamily that's in structures with 5 or more units per structure. These are, generally speaking, the needed housing types that are identified in Oregon's Oregon statutes. May I ask a question? If anybody has questions, will they ask the questions at the end?
Yes, we'll do that.
Okay, perfect. Then if you can go on to the next slide. Looking at Oregon City's mix of existing housing, the majority of it, 74%, is single family detached. In contrast, places like Milwaukee and Gladstone, well, especially Milwaukee and Wilsonville, they have less single family detached and more multifamily than you do currently in Oregon City. And this is partially just a factor of what housing has been developed over the time that Oregon City has existed. If we go to the next slide. What we see here are the new units that were constructed between 2009 and 2020. In dark blue, you see single-family housing types, and those include townhouses because of how the city tracks data. Multifamily housing types are in the light blue. And what you see is year over year, there's some years where you have a lot of multifamily housing and other years where you have little to no multifamily housing. And that's because multifamily housing typically comes on the market as a building all at once, sort of in large groupings. So we can see that Oregon City has been adding both single-family housing and multifamily housing over the last 10 years or so. We go to the next slide. What we're looking at here are median house sales prices as of April 2021. And what we see is that Oregon City's median home sales price was about $540,000. That increased by $194,000 since April of 2016, about a 65% increase. That kind of increase is comparable to the increases you see in many of the other cities that we're showing on this chart in terms of percentage increase. Oregon City is one of the more expensive cities for single-family housing in this part of Clackamas County, but it's certainly not the most expensive. If we go to the next slide. We also look at differences in rents, and what we see for Oregon City is that average multifamily rents in June 2021 were a little above $1,300 per month. And this doesn't include things like utility costs, like heating and electrical utility costs. That's similar to places like Wilsonville and Milwaukee, although a little lower than one and a little above the other. When you look at increase in rent prices since 2010, rent prices have increased by 45% over an about 11-year period. So what we can say is that housing sales prices have grown certainly a lot faster than rent prices. If we go to the next slide. So when you start talking about affordability, you have to consider how much income do households have and how much income can they afford to spend on housing. So Oregon City's median household income is about $72,000. When you look at the change since 2000 for income, Oregon City's income has increased a little bit by about $3,000 when you adjust for inflation. So a very small increase in median household income. But in contrast, we just saw larger increases in rent prices and sales prices. When you look at Clackamas County and Oregon, adjusted for inflation, incomes have decreased over the last 2 decades. Next slide, please. So thinking about affordability in the context of how much a household can afford to pay for housing. Well, a household that pays 30% or more for housing costs is said to be cost burdened. Housing costs for renters is rent plus basic utilities like electricity and heat. Housing costs for homeowners is things like mortgage, interest, insurance, plus those basic utilities. So overall, what we see is about 45% of Oregon City's households are cost burdened. When you look at renters, half of your households are cost burdened, and 25% of your renters are severely cost burdened, meaning that they're paying 50% or more of their incomes for housing costs. So those renters are in a considerable amount of trouble. If we go to the next slide. There we go. So thinking about housing in the context of financial attainability for different housing types, what we're looking at here is something that shows for the median family income in Clackamas County, $92,000. If a household earns 100% of that median household income, they're said to have, 100% of MFI, and they can afford about $2,300 a month in rent and a house costing up to about $368,000. So certainly they can afford the average rents that you're seeing in Oregon City. When you look at the lower end of the spectrum, so a household that earns 50% or half of the median family income, they have income of $46,000 and can afford about $1,150 a month in rent. So they're going to have trouble affording the average rents in Oregon City. And remember that those average rents don't include utilities. So they're definitely having trouble affording those. When you look at the upper end, at about $110,000, a household can afford a house costing up to $440,000. So when we think about what kind of housing does the housing market build, generally speaking, the housing market, the private housing market, doesn't build new housing that's affordable below 50% of median family income, certainly. That's just not financially feasible. Market rate housing, so housing that is not regulated subsidized housing, starts at about 60% of median family income, about $55,000 in Clackamas County. So the housing market, developers generally can't build housing that's affordable and financially feasible to build between 60 and 80% of median family income. That kind of housing, to get it developed, still takes some public assistance of various types. Above that income, generally speaking, in most of our cities in the Portland region, the housing market starts to be able to build new housing that's affordable to them. But when you look at most of the new single-family housing that's built, it's mostly only affordable above 120% of median family income. And your median home sales price at $545,000 is affordable to a household earning about $136,000 or 148% of median family income. And all these incomes that I'm quoting here, they're all for a family of four. So if we go to the next slide, this is showing the percentage of households and the number of households in Oregon City in those income groups. So essentially, nearly 30% of Oregon City's existing households have incomes below 50% of median family income. So they have incomes that are below $46,000. These are the households that are most likely to be cost burdened. And the reason that you're seeing such high rates of cost burden is Oregon City has a relatively large share of those households. You can see that 22% of Oregon City's households are in that low income group, between 50 and 80% of median family income, where building new housing is difficult within the housing market. And then you see the percentages above that. So as the city is thinking about its housing policies, I think it would be helpful to think about the kind of housing that Oregon City wants to support development of, and the kind of housing that community members need that isn't being built simply by the housing market. Put another way, the housing market's already building higher cost housing, and it doesn't need help to continue building that as long as there's land for that development. So I'm going to change from looking at housing affordability on the next slide to looking at land. So part of the housing needs analysis is looking at and developing an inventory of buildable land. So this is land that's vacant and partially vacant within Oregon City and its planning areas that is unconstrained. And by that, what we mean is land that's unconstrained by things like floodplain or floodway, steep slopes, various Goal 5 regulations, all of that. Those are constraints on land that even if it's vacant or partially vacant, that land isn't assumed to have development capacity. So what we looked at is all of your residential land and then your mixed use land. And what we identified was for low density, about 453 acres of vacant, unconstrained buildable land, about 342 of medium density, 62 of high density. So you don't have a lot of land that's in high density, and then about 76 in various mixed use types. We'll talk in a few moments about capacity for housing on these lands, but understand that for mixed use areas, we only assumed a percentage of that vacant land would develop with housing, and some percentage of it would develop with things that aren't, that don't include housing. So on the next slide, what we're showing here, we'll start with the forecast of new housing. So Metro forecasts that Oregon City is going to grow by 7,435 new households needing new dwelling units over the 2021 to 2041 period. Below that, when we're showing the pictures, what we're showing is that about 50% of that new housing will be single family detached, 20% would be single family attached, so townhouses, 10% would be duplexes, triplexes, and quads, and 20% would be multifamily and multi-story multifamily type units. And with those assumptions and looking at the capacity of your vacant land, assuming densities that are similar to what you had since about 2009, Oregon City has capacity for about 7,266 new dwelling units. So your forecast is a little bit higher than your capacity, and your deficit is all around multifamily. So you've got a small deficit of land for multifamily housing. If we go to the next slide, as the city is looking at its policies and what it might want to do in response to the housing needs analysis, our first recommendation is about monitoring land availability and all plan designations and looking for opportunities for development of land at higher densities. So for about 169 units, it's not a big deficit at all. It's a really small deficit. It could be one or two new multifamily structures. Continue to monitor future development and evaluate the resulting densities and housing mix. In 6 years from now, you'll be required to look at this again and to do a new housing needs analysis. And then we start looking at providing opportunities for affordable housing development for both rental and home ownership and for all housing types. And then continue the process of developing and adopting zoning code to comply with House Bill 2001. While this housing needs analysis assumes that you'll comply with House Bill 2001, exactly what happens as a result of House Bill 2001 policies, we won't know for some number of years. But you do have some areas of the city where you've got more vacant land where you could potentially get more development of things like duplexes, triplexes, or townhouses, or cottage housing. So something that's just a little different than you've seen in the past. And then we also recommend that you adopt the housing needs analysis report as an appendix to your comprehensive plan, replacing your current housing needs analysis so that as you're making new decisions about land use, such as zone changes or changes to your zoning code, you can use your new housing needs analysis as your factual basis to explain why, rather than using something that's nearly 20 years old. And very quickly, that is the end of that presentation.
All right, thank you. So at this point, I'll turn to Commission for questions of the presenters, Ms. Turway or folks from Eco Northwest. Does anybody have any questions? I have one question. I'm not seeing any other questions here. My question is about ADUs. Are ADUs part of the forecast or in the capacity equations?
ADUs are assumed to be a type of single-family detached housing. There's not an assumption that there'll be a lot of them, but ADUs don't require new land because they would locate where you have other single-family detached housing. So they give you an opportunity for a minor increase in the density of housing, the land use efficiency that you're getting from single-family housing.
So there was a certain amount of a minimal projection that we might possibly have.
I don't believe we actually made a specific separate projection, but generally speaking, in most cities, ADUs have been accounting for 1 or 2% of housing development. It's possible if the city's focusing on supporting ADU development, that you could get more than that.
Okay. So a potential housing production strategy in the future could be incentives for ADUs that would help us get more units to help bridge that gap in capacity.
Certainly, certainly.
Okay. And then I thought of another question, sorry. The very low income, are you, or the lowest bar on your, in your charts, is that including our houseless population? I know there were some discussions at one point about including houseless populations and how they fit in this whole housing needs analysis. But I kind of feel like that's on the forefront and it's not really included in a lot of housing needs analysis. So I just wanted to ask.
You are correct. The extremely low income group most likely does not include many or perhaps not any homeless individuals, people experiencing homelessness. We do include, I believe, and Margaret can verify this, in the housing needs analysis, a little bit of information about people experiencing homelessness. But this data in the households by income level, that's all from the census. And one of the groups that the census generally does not capture is people experiencing homelessness, because the census is sent to mail addresses.
Okay.
So if you were developing a housing production strategy at this point, which other cities are doing, and I'm not aware of Oregon City doing it, then one of the strategies or one sets of strategies might be around addressing homelessness.
Okay. Any questions? Commissioner McGriff?
Thank you. I don't have any. In the packet that is titled Unconstrained, Vacant, and Partially Vacant Land, and I thought it was interesting that we don't show the constraints in the Rose Road area in the South End concept area, that there are lots of constraints there. And I was also looking at the other end of the urban growth boundary area where we've got Trimble Creek and the forested land that we had talked about in the comp plan update. There's just a big swath of kind of the light brown and the dark brown in there, which is thinking, I know this is not, it's not saying that it can be developed, which is good, but I'm just thinking of someone who is looking at this and possibly saying, oh, there's might be some opportunity there.
So I might ask Margaret to speak about that. I apologize for being less familiar with all of the areas that you're talking about.
Oh, that's okay. You're not supposed to.
Okay. But if there are mapped development constraints, then we have considered them. And that would be on page 86 of the housing needs analysis. You could see the constraints, and I apologize. I don't know what page that is of your packet.
I'm looking at 12.
It's exhibit 66.
Well, it says it's exhibit 7.
You're looking at
yeah, exhibit 7.
I'm looking at the map that shows the actual constraints that are there on the map. So much later.
I'll have to wave my hand quickly to get down to 66.
We did go through after the map exercise was done and double check those. We did work with Echo Northwest to double check the concept plan areas, matched our projections, because there's projections done when you do the concept plans. And then now we have a new layers of projections with new assumptions. And so we did go back and double check those. One of the comment or the questions that we received doing this project had to do with power line easements and constraints related to that, which is not a layer of constraints. So we went back and looked at the data related to that as well. And it seems to be fine for all intents and purposes. So particularly in that south end area, there is some constraints. So that was the one I was most worried about. But overall, the data is showing a similar matchup. So it does look as though our estimate is similar to some of the original estimates, and both of those included analysis excluding constrained lands.
Yeah, Beth, I don't see I'm on page 66, or maybe.
That would be page 86, exhibit
86.
66.
Okay. I was thinking, okay, I'm looking at that and it's not there.
My page may be a little bit different than yours also.
I'm doing the waving. Okay, yeah, I see 86, okay.
And so those are the constraints that we have in the mapping data. As Laura said, we also compared to the results that we were seeing out of the concept plan and made sure that what we were assuming in terms of capacity is similar to what was in the concept plans.
Yeah.
And so it may well be that there are constraints that aren't official constraints, but that were considered in the concept plan.
Right.
So we have implicitly considered them in this as well.
So I'm going to have to anticipate that I'm going to overlay those two in my head and see the layer, I think. So, I appreciated the comment regarding the power lines. It's a whole nother topic, but I have concerns about us saying that you can put housing adjacent to that. It has to do with if you go through there and you're near them, you can hear them buzzing, and whatever they're doing, they're doing. And I know that we're proposing to have some walking trails and some things underneath them, and I think we probably need to revisit that.
And so when the city reevaluates its housing needs the next time, changes to things in the zoning code, like allowing housing where power lines are, that would be taken into consideration at that point.
Good. Thank you, Beth.
Certainly.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
A question and then a comment. The question is, there's a slide that dealt with the relationship between household income, price of the home, and monthly, you call it rent. Did that rent, I presume whether it's rent or whether it's a payment by a homeowner, does that figure include principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, especially taxes?
So are you referring to the median sales price that we had?
There's a couple slides back. You said what income you would need to afford a home of a specific value.
Right. And so of course, every household is different. That's the slide.
Yeah, go forward. I've had it. That one.
So every household is different. And what are the terms of your mortgage? And how much down payment did you make? And so on and so forth. So what we've got on the slide in the house is essentially those are estimates, and they're rough estimates. When we looked at the 545,000, that is just the sales price. And so approximately a household would need to earn about 136,000. Of course, it would vary depending on the tax rate wouldn't vary. And we did account for taxes there. But it would vary depending on the utility use of the household. It would vary depending on the household's mortgage terms, in terms of the length of the mortgage, their interest rate. So the $136,000, that's an estimate. And what I'll say is it is firmly that households have to be fairly high income to be able to afford that median sales price.
To simplify my question, there's a monthly rent figure there. Apparently, you approach this at whatever you did, you assumed a 30-year mortgage or something like that. You assume some percentage down.
Yes.
And the true question is, does a monthly rent include the taxes, which since most of us just got done paying and we're about to?
Well, the monthly rent includes the rent that would be charged to the household. And of course, if I'm renting a unit, I don't know if that includes taxes or not, but presumably the cost of taxes are passed on to people who are renting. And it also includes, it also includes basic utility costs. So the monthly rent is the amount that I can say most surely resembles what HUD considers for affordability. So if you divided $92,000 by 12 and you multiplied that by 0.3, you would come up with about $2,300 is what's considered affordable for that household for rent.
Yeah, I guarantee nobody's absorbing taxes on behalf of their tenant. So
I would assume not.
Yeah. The other thing, the comment I'd make is realize what we're saying here, a growth of 7,400 households. If you even assume 3 bodies per household, you're talking 22,000 people, an increase of 22,000 in a community that's currently 36,000, which is like a 60% growth. Think of the impact on this city and the infrastructure. And even that, honestly, at some point, we're going to have to do something other than a volunteer city government because managing this city is going to be a full-time job. So that's my thoughts on it. With growth like that, we need to be thinking about the future and how to manage it. Thanks.
Certainly. And I will mention that since 1990, so 30 years ago, Oregon City has grown from almost 15,000 people to, in 2019, 35,000 people. So yeah.
Any other questions? Do we have any public testimony?
No.
No. Okay. So with that, I'm going to close the public hearing and turn to the commission for a motion or any other discussion or deliberation. If you need more time, we can also continue this item.
I'll move that we approve the first reading of Ordinance 21-1014 and Ordinance approving GLUA 21-00057 and LAG 21-00004 adopting the housing needs analysis.
I'll be honest that I need more time, but that's just me.
Okay, so I'm going to second that motion. Mr. Kabaisman, do you have?
Yes, ordinance number 21-1014, an ordinance of the City of Oregon City amending the Oregon City Comprehensive Plan by repealing a 2002 housing study and replacing it with a 2021 housing needs analysis as an ancillary document.
All right. Thank you for that on the first reading. Mr. Wiley.
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell?
No.
Commissioner Denise McGriff?
No.
Commissioner Rocky Smith?
No.
Commissioner Adam Marl?
Aye.
And Mayor Rachel Lau-Smith?
Aye.
Motion fails.
All right, so what's your pleasure? I need another motion or maybe additional questions, or what do you need from staff?
I'd like to move to continue this item to our next meeting. I just need more time to digest it. I've read it through once, and it's more complicated than one would assume.
I'll second.
Okay, Mr. Wiley?
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell?
Aye.
Commissioner Denise McGriff?
Aye.
Commissioner Rocky Smith?
Aye.
Commissioner Adam Marl?
Aye.
And Mayor Rachel Lau-Smith?
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right, so this item has been continued and it will come back to us.
November 17th?
Yes. All right, and we will move on to our next public hearing. This is the first reading of Ordinance 21-1016, an adoption of the Park Place Urbanization Plan, and an amendment to the Transportation System Plan. And we're going to follow the same process. So with that, I'm going to open the public hearing and turn to staff for a presentation. It looks like we have Ms. Kelly Reed. Welcome this evening.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. I'm Kelly Reed, planner. This is file number LEG 2103 for adoption of the Park Place Urbanization Plan as part of the Transportation System Plan. The applicant here for this one is also the city, and it's specifically the City Public Works Department. So Josh Wheeler's here to represent the applicant, while I'm representing the Planning Division as the reviewer. And so Josh is going to finish out the staff report once I'm done. So the process here for a legislative file, it's a type 4 process, public hearings before the Planning Commission and the City Commissions. Number of hearings is unlimited. There is no deadline or time limit for when we have to have this adopted. There is no disclosures of ex parte contacts or bias for a legislative file. And as issues arise, we track them in a issues matrix or a public comment matrix, and that's updated each hearing as needed. And so you'll see in your agenda packet that the issues that have come up at Planning Commission hearings are included in that issues matrix. So the Park Place Urbanization Plan, Josh is going to explain it in much greater detail, but I'll give a very brief overview. This plan would amend the city's transportation system plan by adopting it as an ancillary document. No code amendments are part of this proposal, and there would be no changes to the transportation system plan project list. The reason that this plan is being put forward before you is within the study area in the Park Place neighborhood, there are, you actually saw it in the map in the last item where the buildable lands inventory showed a lot of small development opportunities where, you know, housing or other development could occur in the city. And in Park Place, there are actually quite a few properties that are not developed or that are underdeveloped and that have capacity for mostly new housing in that neighborhood. Some of that neighborhood is zoned for commercial uses, but most of it is residential. And so we do see lots of small infill development projects come to us in the Park Place area. The neighborhood currently has very narrow streets. You can see there, that's Hiram Avenue. It's 16 feet wide in this location, has no sidewalks, no curb gutter. The right-of-way width for these streets is very limited in many cases. And in many streets, the existing homes that are there are built pretty close to the street. All of that put together means that the typical local street design that's in our code does not work in this project area. So the Park Place Urbanization Plan is meant to provide more specific, tailored street designs for this neighborhood. So when development does come in, we have more specific guidance on what they should be building and how those streets should be designed. The plan includes specific street designs for a few specific streets, and then includes a family-friendly route where a handful of streets within the neighborhood are designated as family-friendly routes with their own street designs. Also, because as you saw in the photo, a lot of the streets currently lack sidewalks. Some of the sidewalks will be added as development occurs, but where development is not possible or where we don't expect it to happen, we also want those areas to eventually get sidewalks. So while there is no funding identified in the plan, there is a prioritization map that you see here for sidewalk infill projects that could be funded through capital improvement or grants in the future. So the approval criteria for a legislative file is really our comprehensive plan, goals, and policies. The written staff report has an analysis of how the Park Place urbanization plan meets the existing comprehensive plan, goals, and policies. I'm not going to get into all of those right now, but I'm happy to answer questions about them. And kind of taking a step back and looking at the big picture, the Planning Commission and the City Commission, as you review this plan, really the big questions are, is this plan consistent with the comprehensive plan? Is it consistent with the intent of our transportation system plan? And has the city followed the legislative and public engagement process to your satisfaction? The Planning Commission held 2 hearings on this item and has recommended approval to you with conditions that they would like to see more bike lanes and more traffic calming measures in the neighborhood as the plan is implemented. So the Public Works Department has updated page 52 of the plan to respond to that recommendation. And the issues matrix includes the list of all the other issues that were discussed. So the options for the commission, before I hand it over to Josh, are to approve the first reading of the ordinance, or to continue with direction for additional information or changes you'd like to see made. Thank you.
Josh, before you get started, just a quick question. Is there anywhere in this document where it lays out what the right-of-way widths are for the streets that are within Park Place?
For every single street, no. The existing right-of-ways vary throughout.
I assume they do. The pavement, I mean, I know about the pavement part. But I'm really interested in where the rights-of-way are.
Yeah, the right-of-way varies.
Right,
yeah.
so I mean, like, does Holcomb Boulevard have like a 60-foot right-of-way? I mean, is that what it's really supposed to be? I mean, it may not be developed to that, but that's kind of the questions that I...
Yeah, there would be needed right-of-way in many situations.
Okay.
Sorry, can you pause 1 second? Commissioner O'Donnell, I see your hand is up. Do you have a question?
Well, mainly a comment. I actually read the report in its entirety. The right-of-ways are stated in there, and they vary. Some of them are fairly significant. Most of them are much larger than the 34 feet. Some are in the high 40s and 50s. Something Kelly said is absolutely true. This is a $4 million potential expenditure, which is totally unfunded. I was curious, why is it, and it's apparently not subject to a time constraint. Is this the proper time to be reviewing this, or were there other matters that we may spend our time on more productively tonight? And it's an interesting report. It's overwhelming. It's a lot to digest. I think the main report itself was 50-some pages. And they talk about traffic calming measures. They talk about things like there's 3 streets that have acute intersections, which is anything other than a T or 90-degree intersection. Those essentially almost become traffic calming measures because of the way you have to slow down and make a right turn. So I'll leave it to my fellow commissioners if they want to hear this presentation in depth tonight. But it's unfunded and it's some future project. It's a lot to digest. If you haven't read it in its entirety, it may behoove you to set it over and review it in depth. That's all I've got. Thanks.
Okay, Mr. Wheeler, are you going to tackle maybe Commissioner O'Donnell's question about why this is coming forth at this time? Okay, you are. Okay.
Yes, and I'll keep the presentation brief too. Understanding that you may choose to condition it, move this, continue it to another meeting for approval or adoption if that's your pleasure.
Okay.
And there may be some slides in here that are very similar to what Kelly spoke of, so I'll try and brief over those and not stay on them. So you all know me, Josh Wheeler, Assistant City Engineer. The purpose of this study was not to create additional projects or new unfunded items. The actual purpose of the study was actually to be able to assess a project, a future development, for its land use requirements. The struggle that we have, me and my staff, with the Park Place neighborhood is that, as Kelly said in her opening statement, you just can't fit the code into Park Place. The code requirements for road sizes and road widths and right-of-way and all those things, because of the size of the existing roads, where sidewalks could or can't be because of environmental reasons and other things, you can't get those in there. And so you end up with a inconsistency and a bit of a challenge to be consistent over time. And so the purpose of this study is geared much more towards helping development engineers implement our code to a degree reasonable in this neighborhood. And it's very similar to studies or plans like the Leland-Myers corridor plan that says how that corridor should be built out over time. Very similar to the Beaver Creek access plan, the Malala streetscape plan, plans that tell us that when development occurs, here's how you should build it. And then really very much of an if, a side note, if funding were to become available, then here's how the city would build that out. But the intent of this plan is not for the city to build it out. The intent of this plan is for development to build it out using these standards.
Okay.
The project overview is the Park Place area, and that picture shows the area we're looking at. We didn't look at the entire Park Place neighborhood because the areas that are undeveloped, such as the Park Place concept plan, will follow the Park Place concept plan. And then other property that's been recently annexed, such as the Sears property, will follow the code as it is. This is the area of currently somewhat urbanized area that still needs to be further urbanized based on the needs of the transportation system and the desires of the community. You saw some examples of sidewalks that are challenging and how they don't fit to be able to continue or get to the place it needs to go. So sidewalks was looked at. We also looked at biking and noticed there's a lack of facilities, a lack of wayfinding, a lack of connectivity. The only bike lanes exist on Holcomb right now. We also have the vehicular challenges that Kelly showed of the narrow roads. And the red lines on those roads are the ones that are substantially narrow. So a large amount of them, and that's the oldest part of Park Place. To get community feedback, we wanted this to be a community-led discussion and understand what their needs are in their own community. They're the ones that live there. What is it you feel you need? What does it feel you want? And can we accommodate that was a lot of the question. You'll see in the study 2 different surveys that we did and their results. These slides show some of the summary of those results. You'll see that 95% of those that live in the neighborhood are the ones that did the survey. Someone may ask, where did the other 5% come from? Well, we sent the surveys to anyone that lived at a property in the city and anyone that owned a property in the Park Place neighborhood. So it could be that someone owns a property in Park Place, but they live elsewhere in the city or a different suburb or city itself. In the second survey, we got really detailed in saying, we've come up with cross sections that we think fit these roads. We want to get your feedback. We gave them option A, option B. They talked a lot about, should there be parking on the road? Should it be bike lanes instead? Should we do one side of the road or two sides of the road? Those types of questions were in the survey. And these were some of the results that we got. We then ultimately came to a roadway classification plan that explained how roads should be built out. So in the cyan color, they should be built out per the TSP and the existing city code. The other colors, the dark blue and the greens, are different classifications of road where you should follow a very specific road-specific plan, different from the city code. These are some examples of those cross sections. Here on the left, you see Hunter Avenue with parking on both sides and sharrows in the middle for bikes and cars to be together. And on the right side, you see Swan Avenue where we have separated bike lanes. There was a large public comment of sidewalks and the desire for sidewalks and the need of sidewalks. And so we wanted to make sure that we talked about sidewalks, even though we, again, want to stress, we anticipate this being done with development, private development, and not necessarily a capital project, as it's currently unfunded. But as priorities come through the future, that may be a request to find funding for these things. And so we said, if we had money, where would the money be spent in the Park Place neighborhood? And we prioritize these routes based on getting residents from their place of residence to a major place, such as a school, a church, a convenience store, or a major roadway to get to where they want to get to. Just to let you know what, we also did a cost estimate, and it's in the appendix showing the cost of each segment of road. And so ultimately, our priority 1 roadways was a little over 2,7,600 lineal feet of sidewalk. And priority 2, if you get priority 1 done, or if there's nothing else that can easily be done in priority 1, then that's about 1.7 million, 5,700 lineal feet. A lot of sidewalk missing in Park Place is what that's really telling you, and not cheap to build. And so that's why we do anticipate that being done with development. However, if the city did choose to start funding it, this is the direction of cost that is involved. And so as Kelly said, the next options are really to determine, do you have questions? Is this something you want to take up tonight or in a future meeting? The next step would be either to request continuing this or requesting additional information, or providing approval of the first reading of the ordinance tonight. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Wheeler. Does anybody have any questions for either Ms. Reed or Mr. Wheeler?
Mayor Lyle Smith, I don't have any questions at this time, and I hate starting out my statement by apologizing, but because I spent so much time going through the housing needs analysis, I did not get to this at all, and it was just too much. I would really like to have a work session on this, and I wasn't sure why we didn't have a work session before this was presented to us. I understand the Planning Commission had 2 or 3 bites at the apple on this. I do want you to understand that I do recognize what you are trying to do. I happen to be the staff person that processed the health hazard annexation in 1989. And let's just say, for proper comment, that the Park Place area was sort of allowed to develop helter-skelter, is how I will phrase that. And so it was sort of anything goes, and I think it was recognized in 88, 89, 90, that when we had to bring this in, we were starting with a deficit. I mean, there's no rhyme or reason about why some streets are paved to 16 feet and others aren't, and there's no sidewalk. I mean, it was in the county. The county had different development standards, if any, and so it just sort of happened. I know that we did not take over Holcomb Boulevard until 2012 because we were haggling with the county about its substandardness. And so we ended up getting this area, not all of it, because I was looking at your statement here, you said it was annexed in 89. Well, not all of this area was annexed in 89, only a portion of it was. And when we inherited that, I think the staff report was thousands of pages, but it was recognized that we were going to have some major public facilities and services problems, particularly with roadways, not just the sewer, getting the sewer in there, but the roadways were, they're still a mess primarily. So I understand where you want to go with this, because this is not a one-size-fits-all roadway system. The areas that you talked about in Scion that are going to be new and don't have these constraints, I agree with you. But I want to be able to understand more fully of how you get there. I asked Mr. Lewis about how much involvement was involved, what did the neighborhood have to say? And, some of that could have been included in the staff report about the robust involvement that you had. I understand it was there, but if you were just to read this, we don't know that. The survey is one way, I asked a couple of people that I know in Park Place, including Mr. LaSalle. I said, are you satisfied with this? Or do you have more questions? Do you have more concerns? And they basically all him and others said, yeah, it was kind of overwhelming, but that the city did a good job. So in order for me to respond more fully to you, I just need more time, and I'm not going to have this read by the 17th if that's what we're going to continue it to, because I'm going back to the housing needs analysis so I can digest it for a second time. And I want to be fair to you and the staff who put all this amazing work in here. But the one thing I did want to ask is I have forgotten, what is the public right-of-way of Holcomb? It's not on the list on page 11.
I do not know that off the top of my head.
Okay, so that would be something I would be interested in knowing, just because that helps me sort of digest how it fits into your matrix of, this one's only 48, it's paved to this. It's a hot mess in Park Place is what I would describe. And we do have to treat it differently. We just can't, we can't just apply our regular standards, because it just doesn't, like you said, some houses are right up to the right of way and others are not. So I will get to this, I promise.
All right, Commissioner O'Donnell.
Well, I'm always suspicious of surveys that are stated in percentage terms, especially since my last exchange with ODOT, where they stated their percentages in terms of this bicycle ped bridge, only to find out that they've only surveyed less than 0.5% of Oregon City residents. So I'm curious, Josh, do you know how many people responded to the survey in terms of real numbers versus percentage?
Yes, I don't exactly remember the exact numbers off the top of my head at the moment. If I recall, the first survey had around 300 respondents, and the second survey had about 100 respondents.
Okay.
Yeah, and that data is in the report that we can provide.
Okay, my thoughts about this, and it is complex, is I looked at the cross sections of the roads, and there are many, and I think they need to be reviewed. There's a pretty heavy emphasis on bicycle lanes, and at the risk of incurring the wrath of the bicycle community. Unless you're training for the Tour de France or the Olympics, that's not exactly a bicycle-friendly area up there. And I saw a submittal by Mike Mitchell that talked about maybe rebalancing parking needs versus bicycle needs. And I think that should be considered. The other thing that bothers me more than anything, if we ask what is the number one need of that community, of the Park Place community, especially in view of forthcoming developments, of which there are two major developments that'll add people to it, and in view of the experiences of the last year, specifically fire season and trying to get people down off that hill, I think anybody could agree that the number one need is another major arterial to get people down off that hill. And I'd like to see some emphasis on that versus this. I understand the need for this report, and it's like laying the groundwork as an approach to the future. But again, it's unfunded. I've got no argument with it. I think it needs some refinements, as Mr. Mitchell said. But I also think that the number one need for that community is how am I going to get people down off that hill with the growth of the community and our recent experience in the past year? So I'd like to see people start looking at how do you punch in another road that gets down that hill. So that's my comments for tonight. And it's a heck of a report. It's lengthy and it's detailed, but I think it can be refined a little bit. Thanks.
Commissioner Morrow.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, so for the last presentation we saw, as by virtue of being on the PAT and on CIC, I think that was my third or fourth time hearing that presentation. But for this one, and that's why I was ready to vote, but for this one, I would request some more time. I was able to get through it. But I think a couple more read-throughs would be beneficial for something as dense as this. So I concur with Commissioner McGriff.
Okay, so I also have a couple of questions. So I see that this study specifically excludes Holcomb Boulevard, and Commissioner O'Donnell was just talking about either another arterial. I hadn't heard that proposal before, but are there any plans for improvements to Holcomb Boulevard that could help relieve congestion or the concerns of the neighborhood about the future development that's going to occur there? And I mean, it's nice that we have this. I understand why you're doing it, because it helps the future development in the neighborhoods in general. And so I don't have a problem with moving this forward at some point once everybody's had a chance to review it, including myself, in more detail. But can you comment about Holcomb Boulevard?
Yes, Holcomb Boulevard, the reason it was not part of the study is because there is a separate plan called the Holcomb Pedestrian Access Plan, not Access Plan, Pedestrian Plan. But the purpose of that plan was to show how to get sidewalks in there and how in some areas to get a center turn lane throughout Holcomb. And part of that plan has been built with some of the sidewalks over the last 20 years, but there's still more of it to build. And so those are TSP projects. My understanding is I believe we're going to be looking at in Public Works some prioritization of those TSP projects to see if the current prioritization is the way to go. And so that's how you're going to see Holcomb within all that. The second question to Commissioner O'Donnell's statement is the secondary access that is planned for that area is based on the Park Place concept plan, and that would be the extension of Holly Lane to get people down to Redland Road. So you have two ways to get down to Redland and out of that area. That's what the current plan is for secondary access.
And then just a couple of quick comments. Just starting off in the very beginning on the introduction, I wasn't able to make it through this entire report yet, so I'm with you all in this, needing to review this more. But I found it interesting that in the first paragraph, it talks about Swan Avenue and how the neighborhood in general is kind of broken into two sections between the older development and the newer development. And it makes a statement that the focus of those projects are roadways to the west of Swan Avenue within the Park Place neighborhood. But when I was going through the report, I didn't feel like that was the case. I felt like the study area included all of the study area and it wasn't focused just west of Swan Avenue. So I'm trying to understand that statement with all of the maps and everything that I saw that included the entire study area versus this east-west kind of statement. Can you help me there? What am I missing?
Yes, so we wanted to ensure that the study area was any existing infrastructure, meaning roadway infrastructure, within Park Place neighborhood. So that included things like the pretty new Abernathy Landing subdivision or other subdivisions that are east of Swan. Most of those were built more recently and with current standards. And so therefore you'll notice in the exhibits that there's really no suggested improvements on those roads. They don't need sidewalks, they already have them. They don't need to be widened because they're the proper width. So that's why you'll see that we want to make sure that we didn't miss a road that hadn't been upgraded properly. And so we looked at the whole area, but when it came to what is the need to be able to tell the development community and the development staff how to improve it, it was everything Swan and to the west, because that's the area which is the older neighborhood that has roads that are insufficient, smaller width, no sidewalks, and that sort of thing.
Okay. Clarified, because I had the same comment you did. I was like, okay, that doesn't make sense to me.
So I would recommend you just look at the figures and see if you come to the same conclusion of what that statement says. Because I've looked at all of those maps in the very first section, and all of them have highlighted roads that are to the east of Swan Avenue. And so again, I was just kind of confused by that statement. I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. And then when I continued to the report, I felt like there was a complete discrepancy. So, I just want to be really clear when we're talking to the neighborhood or when we're getting comments, because some of the comments were about the concept area, for example. And I think in the sentence that says Holcomb Boulevard is excluded and not included in this study, we should probably also include the Park Place concept, because, and just be really clear that that wasn't included in this study either, because that whole concept plan has a whole lot of, I'll say it in air quotes, baggage along with it. And if it wasn't part of this study, I just want to be really clear and upfront with folks that that's not what we were looking at.
We can definitely add that clarification for sure.
All right. I think that's all that I have for this evening. Sounds like we're going to be continuing this. The question will be, Commissioner McGriff said that she needs more time and coming back on the 17th. Is there any time constraints on this that we should be aware of? No, so we can put this off to maybe a date certain in December?
Yes.
Could we get a work session, please? I just really feel unprepared to jump right into an ordinance when we haven't had a chance to really, look at it. And I think it's only fair the Planning Commission got to have a couple of bites at the apple. Maybe it wasn't a work session, but from what I understand, it was more like a work session. I know we have a big docket, but this is obviously important.
So why don't we continue this to December 15th? We might be able to move some things around for the December 7th work session. It's full right now, but we'll go back and talk. If we can't, we're probably into February for the work session at that point. But we could just come back on this December 15th and continue it to a new date certain. But this would at least give us time to go back and see what can move on the work session schedule.
Okay.
I'm okay with that. I mean, I would, like I said, I want to be fair to staff. So I would move that we continue, let me get the right numbers here. LEG 21-00003, adoption of Park Place Urbanization Plan and amendment to the Transportation System Plan to a date certain of December 15th.
Second.
All right, motion's been made and seconded. Mr. Wiley?
Commissioner Frank.
Do I need Bill Kavaisman? Sorry.
We're not adopting anything.
No, we're not. We're good. Sorry.
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell.
Good catch.
Aye.
Commissioner Denise McGriff.
Aye.
Commissioner Rocky Smith.
Aye.
Commissioner Adam Marl. Aye. And Mayor Rachel Lau Smith.
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right, just try not to forget you, Mr. Kavaisman.
I appreciate it.
All right, thank you, staff, for that presentation and answering our questions. All right. I'm thinking we can probably move pretty quickly through the remainder of the agenda without taking a break unless someone raises their hand. I think the general business is quick. Not seeing anything? Okay, so we'll move on to general business. This is 9A. This is the second reading of ordinance number 21-1015 regarding the emergency annexation that we talked about at our last meeting. Is there anything from staff on this? It's more of a, if there's any questions from the commission, is that correct, Mr. Way?
Yep, here to answer any questions you may have.
This is a second reading. This one was kind of squirrely. I know we had lots of questions. Any new questions tonight? Mr. O'Donnell, Commissioner O'Donnell?
It's not a question, it's actually a comment, and it's not directed at this applicant or this specific instance, a 1 acre annexation, but we talked about our concern about potentially gaming the system by bringing in larger plots of land under these emergency circumstances. And I'd like to compliment Ms. Turway. We talked about it offline. And I'm curious if anyone else on the commission would be interested in having all these annexations and as standard procedure be reviewed by Planning Commission. And that would give us a safeguard for those that may be trying to circumvent the system and bring in a larger plot of land under these circumstances, both as an annexation and a zone change. So it's not that needs to be discussed as part of this decision tonight, but I think it's something that we should discuss in the future. And again, my compliments to Ms. Turway for a solution to an anticipated problem. Thanks.
Turway.
We have solved that problem, so all emergency annexations will now go before the Planning Commission as well as the City Commission. So you'll see one coming up soon, and it's directed through our normal annexation path. So we will.
So how did you solve the problem? I guess I'm interested. What happened? What changed?
I made a policy. And told staff that's what we should do.
Okay.
The direction to skip Planning Commission was based off some guidance in our comprehensive plan that urges a swift review of emergency annexation. So it's been solved.
Mayor Lowell Smith.
My compliments.
I have another suggestion which would speed it up. I do not like the fact that emergency annexations are coupled together, zone change and annexation. They should just be annexation if it's an emergency. That's all that we should be dealing with. They can come back later and ask us for something else at some later date, but I would like to see that uncoupled. And I know Commissioner O'Donnell mentioned that at the last time we talked about, not about emergency annexations, but about that coupling, that it again, I just, that would speed it up. If it's an emergency, then we need to get it annexed. We're not talking about what's going to happen later on.
I don't believe we have the authority to do that, but I'll defer to our city attorney, Mr. Kabizman, to talk about it further.
Thank you. Yeah, there is a state statute, ORS 227175, that says that cities must have a consolidated procedure by which an applicant may apply for all permits needed to do this. There is, at least an argument that annexation is not permit. But in most circumstances, I believe you got to allow people to apply for everything at once. We can do a little more research on that and confirm whether annexations fit within that category or not.
I think they don't, but that's just me.
Sure. Okay. Want to make sure we get that right, and we can bring that back.
Bill, specifically an emergency annexation. That's what I'm talking about, an emergency annexation. The emergency is that they need to get hooked up to the sewer. It's not supposed to be about some development in some far off future. Right. It's supposed to be about hooking them up because it's a health hazard.
And I understand what you're saying about the difference between an emergency annexation as opposed to another type of annexation. But I'm not certain that distinction is caught in the statutes. And all I'm saying is let's make sure we get it right. And so we can look into that a little more and bring it back to you.
Okay. Commissioner O'Donnell.
Actually, I was just about to put my hand down. I think the matter's been discussed. I also differentiate between an emergency annexation to solve a specific problem versus an annexation and zone change as part of a development. So I'd like Mr. Kabizman to, with the blessing of the commission, look into that. And I'm prepared to take a stand on that unless somebody tell us different. Thanks.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. That sounds like a move in the correct direction if we can do it legally, lawfully. All right, do we have a motion on this second reading of the ordinance?
Boy, nobody wants to make motions tonight. What is going on?
That's every meeting.
No, not every meeting.
I'll make a motion to move to approve the second reading of ordinance number 21-1015, an ordinance approving GLUA 21-00005, an emergency annexation AN 21-00001, and zone change ZC 21-0002 to R6 for those 1.06 acres.
There a second?
Second.
Mr. Geisman.
Ordinance number 21-1015, an ordinance approving emergency annexation and zone change proposal number GLUA 21-0005 and 21-0001 and ZC 21-0002 of certain property located at 19630 South McCord Road and adjacent right-of-way on McCord Road to the city of Oregon City.
Mr. Wiley?
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell.
Aye.
Commissioner Denise McGriff.
Abstain.
Commissioner Rocky Smith.
Aye.
Commissioner Adam Marl.
Aye.
And Mayor Rachel Lyle Smith.
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right, so now we move on to communications. City Manager Conkle, you put two interesting items here in your communications section. You want to start?
Sure, thank you. Good evening. The first one is the proposed policy for the utilization of Friends of Trees planting program for limited street tree replacements. As part of the discussion about sidewalk replacement, one of the discussions was could property owners that are addressing lifted sidewalks or trees located too close to certain infrastructure that have to be removed currently, once they're into a code enforcement situation, they're responsible for the purchase of the tree. There was a question, could we open up the Friends of Trees program to individuals that are dealing with lifted sidewalks and whatnot? So this policy reflects that. Part of the discussion was that, the Friends of Trees was intended to provide additional tree canopy rather than replacement of trees that have been removed. So that's the only real difference here as to why they had been separated previously. But what this policy would do is open up the eligibility for the Friends of Trees program. And Ms. Turway, if there's anything I missed or you'd like to add.
That was a great summary. The only thing I would add is participation in the Friends of Trees program allows the property owner to participate for $35 a tree, which is a deep discount, so it's subsidized by the city. The commission was talking about opportunities to assist property owners when they have to deal with infrastructures where our standards have changed over time. The other thing that I would add is that we have 15 available plantings for our November 20th planting. So if the city commission is okay with this policy, although we're not asking for approval by the city commission, but it's draft right now. So if you guys are okay with it, we can move forward with it. And then we can reach out to some people in code enforcement and see if we can solve their code enforcement and get them a discounted tree.
All right. Thank you for that report. I think you're essentially doing what we talked about and asked about when we were discussing the sidewalk issue. Does anybody have any objections to this draft policy?
I don't have an objection. I just have a clarification. So you said that, I've seen the signs already around the city of people who've already have requested. Is that what you're talking about, the 15 that are going to get planted now? Those are the ones that have the signs in front of their places. So we're talking about something subsequent?
We have space in our November 20th planting. So as you recall, in response to the February storm, the city commission committed to planting about 415 trees through a couple of planting seasons. So we break them up into different plantings. So this planting in a couple of weeks on November 20th, we have availability for 15 more trees and are looking for property owners to fill that.
Okay. Then, yeah, I'm okay with that. Then I thought when you said the 15, that was what we already had planned and people have already reserved who are not removing trees because of storm stuff. So that's 15 additional. So I know $35 is a steal. Is there any way that, I think even if you got a tree for $70, you're still getting a deal. But that's the standard price?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's their standard.
Okay. That's our subsidy standard, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what is the process for if folks are listening and they're interested in getting one of the 15 slots for a tree? Well, how do they sign up?
They can contact Friends of Trees and let them know, or contact Kelly Reed, KREID @orcity.org. Give us a call at the Planning Division and we'll link you up. There's I think, a handful of days left to actually get signed up in the queue for the November 20th planting. We were going to reach out to some neighborhood association or HOA HOAs to see if they could, use their social networks to figure out who needs it.
I think that's a good idea that we be a little more proactive, because not everybody's watching this fabulous meeting. If we know of code compliance folks, then maybe we can reach out to them and say, hey, you've got 3 days to decide whether you want to do this tree or whatever the time frame is.
Yep, and we have more plantings after this planting too, so if it's not in 2 weeks, we still have the next one.
Okay, any other comments or any, Commissioner Morrow?
Yeah, just for clarification, who is already eligible right now for the discounted rate?
It's people who want to plant additional trees. We'll take a handful of people who are in code enforcement, who are severely rent burdened or have a really hard financial times, and occasionally every year we'll take a handful and put them into the program too. But for the most part, it's just people who want an additional tree on their property.
Okay.
Okay, so seeing nothing else, it all looks good. Mr. Kunkel, item B, implementation of House Bill 2006.
I'll turn this one over to Ms. Turway.
All right, so House Bill 2006 temporarily allows emergency shelters to be placed without land use review or public comment opportunities if the applications are submitted before July 1st, 2022. And so the bill allows essentially an over-the-counter review with non-discretionary criteria. So they submit same as like a business license, they submit an application in the city. We just check the boxes if they meet the standards, yes, no, and then allow emergency shelters to occur. The shelters have to open within 2 years of approval, and then after they're open, if they stop for more than 2 years, then they have to go through whatever the approval process is for time. So this House bill as a whole is for a limited time duration to address homelessness shelters. If somebody wants to do something in a building that is a homeless shelter and, I don't know, a grocery store or something like that, that grocery store will still have to go through the normal land use review. We're just talking about simply the homeless shelter component. There is an explanatory memo in your packet from Deputy City Attorney Carrie Richter that goes through sort of our regulations, what we can do and can't do. So we're finding ourselves in a place where we have this House bill, we've got to implement it. And so in that packet, we have an application form where we show you the ways in which we're implementing it. So the city will review the application for a variety of non-discretionary criteria, including if there's active police, if the property is actively being served by police, if it's actively being served by water services. So very, yes or no type questions. Is there a health protocol or safety protocol? Is there a code of conduct or screening for their clients? And then is there a 24-hour phone number available? So this is timely because we did receive an application from the Father's Heart to utilize this. And so we'll continue to process that application in compliance with these standards. But now we have a process in place, an application form in place for any future shelters that may want to submit before July 1st, 2022. We did do some coordination with other cities to see what everybody else has done. Eugene has 7 of these approved and two more in the queue. I would say the cities that are most advanced with this work and translating it into what it actually means and how the application forms look are Bend and Eugene. And so there has been a lot of research done with those agencies as well.
All right, so the question I have is about the time. The bill essentially says application, that kind of sunsets that section of the legislation by the July 1 timeframe. But what wasn't clear to me, and you kind of went through it a little bit, is this isn't a permanent, so the application goes in now or anytime between now and July, but they have 2 years to start it. Can you go over what the temporary, like what are the timelines?
You have to start operation within 2 years of approval. If you don't start within 2 years, then you can't. You've got to go through the normal process.
Okay.
So you can't just put in a bunch of applications and do nothing and come back in 10 years. Also, once you open a facility, if you stop for more than 2 years, then you lose it that way as well.
Otherwise, it's permanent and it can just stay there as long as it wants.
Correct.
Even though the legislation sunsets.
Correct.
What constitutes the emergency? Is it weather related? Is there a is it emergency like 24 hours a day, all day long? I mean, not all day long, but all year long? Is there a time? I mean, we had an emergency saying when the weather got to a certain point, that's when that was an emergency.
So there's a definition of emergency shelter, which is one of the questions that we ask. It's defined as a building or cluster of buildings that provide shelter or on a temporary basis for individuals and families who lack permanent housing.
Okay, that didn't answer my question though.
So according to the House bill, there doesn't have to be defined by any particular weather.
It's not defined by weather.
It's if you're providing a shelter.
So if XYZ church in the middle of a single family residential zone wants to have an emergency shelter, boom. No, I mean, again, because we just went through this.
Right.
The neighbors don't get notified. The neighbors don't get to know anything other than all of a sudden people start showing up in this particular, wherever it is. I'm just trying to be generic about it, not pinpoint anything.
That is correct. There is no opportunity for comment or opportunity for the city to guide that in any particular way.
Yeah, this is the biggest example of legislative overreach and just tromping on home rule, as you can imagine.
Oh, you think this is the only one?
This isn't the only one, but this is a perfect example of how egregious the legislature, and clearly this legislature that we have in session is willing to continue doing this. This is one of several that have happened in the last couple of sessions, and there's more in the pipeline that they're just...
So I mean, again, there's a lot of, Carrie's not here, but what does adequate transportation access mean? What does will not pose an unreasonable risk to public health and safety? I mean, it's fraught with so many things that, again, it's fraught with so many things that there's a recognition, number one, that there is a problem, but there is no recognition. And we didn't spend how many hours going through a conditional use permit and understanding how both sides are being affected by everything. I want to protect people who may need emergency services. I also want to protect people who are nearby, who aren't going to have, any say. I mean, we heard this. I don't have to repeat this. We heard what circumstances caused people to go into stress. And you talk about, stress on both sides. There's stress on both sides. There's no accountability here of anything. And so, our community member is going to have to, constantly put the non-emergency number on their speed dial so that they're calling constantly, because let's just face it, maybe the facility is great, but it's kind of what happens outside of that affects people and their homes. Overreach is being too kind. I understand. I'm assuming you got information from Eugene, or you have documents from Eugene that show how they dealt with this, and this is just, I don't see anything like that. I saw your application. I thought I had it in my packet, but I don't. It must be in the other stuff I was reviewing tonight.
Yes. We did take a look at those, Eugene and Bend, quite a bit. I would say that ours is not exactly like Eugene or Bend. It's a slightly different, but you'll see a lot of commonalities. You nailed it when you said the criteria in the House bill in some ways were a little not as specific as they could be. And so our application shows how we are interpreting it. For example, you were talking about transit service. So we define adequate transit service or access to commercial and medical services a very specific way. If you're a half mile within a stop, or you have services to get people to that stop, or you have those services within a half mile. So which one of those ones do you comply with? So we tried to translate what was not clear and objective to yes, no answers.
Why did you pick a half mile? Why did you pick a half mile? That's a hell of a lot of distance.
It's a typical walking distance. For a lot of planning exercises, utilize a half mile quite frequently.
Commissioner O'Donnell, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I had it up and I put it down because I didn't know if I wanted to join the rant about the state government playing in everybody else's sandbox, and then courteously called legislative overreach and disregard for home rule entirely. I do think that the Richter memo is the most informative, and there is still that criteria about, on page 2, about statutory criteria that deals with will not pose an unreasonable risk to public health or safety. I think if we get into that situation, then we review the granting of that permit and potentially revoke it. We have an obligation to the health and safety of our community. But, without being specific, well, Father's Heart, I mean, there's nobody that disagrees with the mission. The question is the location, and maybe a concerted effort by all parties involved to find a more opportune location would serve everyone well. Thanks.
We started that conversation this afternoon, which I was going to inform the commissioners, and Father's Heart, at least on two tracks, is option 1 is we're going to be looking at how to help them find a larger facility. Option 2 is that they've committed to working with the neighborhood to put together a good neighbor agreement. Now, I'm not saying everybody who comes in with these shelter applications might be as willing, but I think that there's a recognition that there's an obligation on both sides, and it's not just a one-sided review. So that's, we plan to have a second meeting in the next couple of weeks to continue to move this forward. Chief Band was in attendance today, as well as business owners, residents, myself, and 2 people from the Father's Heart. So I have hope that we're going to make some progress that will be beneficial to everyone and allow that facility to operate with some compassion for not only their people that they're trying to serve, but the people that are adjacent.
Yeah, I would love to see that location moved, I guess, to return to this bill. The line that says will not pose an unreasonable risk to public health or safety. What criteria are we using for that?
Good question. We are asking if the property is served by police, fire, emergency services, city or West Water, city sewer, and electricity. And then we are also, there's a separate provision where we're requiring an inspection and sign off from the building department as well as the fire department.
What about like number of police calls from properties within a quarter of a mile? Let's even make it a little bit smaller to be a little bit fairer, if it's a quarter of a mile from the facility.
Yeah, that does not define an unreasonable risk to public health and safety. That basically deals with the internal facility itself.
Right, and whether or not they get sure they get services. I know if they call the police, sure, the police will come, ambulances will come, fire department will come, they have water. To me, that's not addressing.
No, that's not,
that
definitely not.
line on that will not pose unreasonable risk to public health or safety. Because the issue that we heard from the community members when they were here was that they did not feel safe in their own front yards, on their front porches, and they had called police multiple times. They've had vandalism, they've had, a whole smattering of things. And part of our reason for denying that conditional use permit was about safety, and that criteria was that when they were operating in the evenings, that the safety factor was an issue, and we use that in our legislative findings. So I'm kind of surprised. I would love to see some teeth here, if that's even possible.
We don't think that it is. The House bill, and Mr. Kabaisman can talk about it more, but the House bill is written from the perspective of safety for the shelter.
No.
Is the shelter safe? Is it a safe place for homeless people?
Yeah, well, that's because we know who wrote this bill. It's coming out of the legislature.
Yeah, well, we also have an obligation to provide safety for people who live here. If people can't exit their own property because they perceive a real threat because somebody is there and they cannot leave, to me, that is a violation of public health and safety.
I know.
You are trapped in your home. We have the right to come and go, and if you can't, that to me that is a violation of public health and safety. It's also not safe for the people who are at the facility either. Because more than likely that person is trying to get in there and they can't, and causing problems for the other.
We do have the provisions for screening or a code of conduct as well, which also get at that same question of safety.
But they already have that at Father's Heart.
And it isn't working.
It doesn't work, and they already say they worked with the neighborhood, and we heard from the neighborhood, and that was a problem. Commissioner O'Donnell, you've had your hand raised.
Only because I totally agree with you, Mayor. The statement is not about protecting, will not pose an unreasonable risk to the clientele of the facility. The statement is about posing an unreasonable risk to public health or safety. And the public is everyone, anyone who walks by, anyone who lives by. If you've got an ongoing situation where you've got a series of events, whether it be vandalism, assaults, harassment, that's public safety. And if the source of that is any facility, then I think that's a disqualifying factor and a reason to not comply. I don't agree that this is aimed at only the residents of the facility.
You use the word public.
I feel very strongly about that.
That's the key. The word is public.
Public. That's right. That's everyone. Not a specific group of people, everyone.
Mr. Kabaisman, do you have comments?
Yeah, certainly hear the commission's, what their concerns about public safety. And we all were here at the hearings on the Father's Heart conditional use permit and understood why that was denied. The legislature wasn't. And if you go back through the legislative history, it's fairly clear that the focus was, in fact, on the building itself. Could there be a situation where you could say that the residents or clients of the facility pose that unreasonable risk to, unreasonable risk to public health and safety? Possibly, but boy, it would have to be something, incredibly unusual. And, what we heard from the Father's Heart, I think the legislature has made clear that that is not something they consider an unreasonable risk to public health and safety. And we can get to that legislative history if you want, but it's an extremely, the intent of this bill was to make it a very high hurdle.
Well,
Commissioner Morrow, you've had your hand up.
Yeah, you actually answered my question. I was going to ask if they had a code of conduct prior to that hearing for the exact reasons that you were saying.
And it
didn't work. So, yeah, that was my question.
Okay. Commissioner O'Donnell, is your hand back up?
So it's back up because I respectfully disagree with Mr. Kabizan. Public health and safety, if you're subjected to assaults, harassment, fear of your life, unsanitary conditions, the government's job is to protect all people, not any one group of people. And I stand by that, and I'm willing to fight for that if necessary.
Commissioner McGriff.
Yeah, I agree with you, Commissioner O'Donnell. We are going to be called on to be accountable. And we have to try to adjudicate both sides of this. And that's, I'm sticking to that. We have to figure it out. If somebody wants to take us to task, I say bring it.
I'm with you.
So are you suggesting that we change the application form, or that there's different criteria or something and take it for a spin?
I think
Sure.
we need to put in something where
I like that technical term. Let's take it for a spin.
That's the formal term.
Yes, I like that. Thank you for using that. Yes, I couldn't have said it better myself. I understand that the compatibility and livability impacts are not, but I think we need to come up with a clear and objective finding or a statement about health and safety risk. I mean, I can tell you if some, we have right now in the news, we have people saying they did X, Y, and Z because they feared for their life. Well, who's to say that they didn't or they did? That's for a court to decide on those cases. But I think as a city commission, we have an obligation to not only the people who need the emergency shelter, but we have an obligation to those people who are the public. And those people who are in the emergency shelter, they are the public as well.
Yes. Chief Bam.
This is sort of not digging into exactly what you guys are talking about, but there's a relevance to every time we talk about the reasons that these solutions need to be regional. The very prime example. There have been times that Marty Gant has told me that the county for sheltering puts out basically an RFP. And there have been, I think, several times where the only outfit that's putting in and submitting is Father's Heart in the entire Clackamas County. And so we kind of become a destination when we have the only warming shelter. So these types of services, we need to lean into the county to get them to provide these in various places throughout the county so that the only place to find a warming center, not in just this city. And I also don't think that if you're going to be responsible for providing warming shelters, that it's good enough to just throw an RFP out there and hope somebody's going to apply. So I think as we're moving forward with whatever different strategies we're going to land on, this is a prime example why I think the county's the one who needs to be coordinating that these are in different tactical locations throughout the county, so it's not just Oregon City.
So you mean strategic locations?
Yeah, same.
Yeah.
Either way.
Proactively.
Yeah, tactical sounded a little more militaristic to me. So I know what you're saying.
I just more mean whether it's, I don't mean in that sense, I just mean tactically, like really thinking through what is going to be the most efficient placement. So strategic's maybe a better word.
Yeah, but I mean, I agree with you. An RFP is really not the way to go. And if we're talking about partnerships, there needs to be some proactivity. I mean, as you so aptly stated, they opened a cooling facility. So that was being proactive. There needs to be something on the equivalent for, because obviously not everybody's here. They're in other places in this county and they all can't be here. There just isn't space.
So, Ms. Truway, I'm afraid I know the answer to this. Was this legislation effective upon signature, and regardless of our ability to have an application, the application from the Father's Heart's already been submitted and there's nothing we can do about this? Is that going to be your answer?
Correct. We seem to have an obligation to do something with the application before us.
Did they, what application did they file? The one that you put in the packet?
We hadn't created the form yet. So they did submit an application for House Bill 2006, and they addressed all of the criteria that we have in the form and provided information showing how they met that criteria. So the form also requires things like maps to show you're within a half mile of things and so forth, and plans of what the building looks like and verification of how many beds and that kind of thing.
So they submitted a packet of information to you
without
prior to us having an application or anything, and we're just having to deal with it because the legislation passed and is effective.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, I think we're kind of hung, or we're hamstrung on this one. So the last thing I'll say on this was led by Speaker Tina Kotek, and she's running for governor. So you guys think about that when you're voting. And I'll leave that at that.
I already thought about it, my friend.
All right, Commissioner O'Donnell, last thoughts?
I just don't like to see us just roll over. I just feel like you put any institution that sets these kind of facilities up needs to be put on notice that if these events occur, then your ability to remain in that location is subject to review and revocable. And I will. I mean, we got to go to court on that and go. But maybe the simple solution is work together with at least the current provider to find a more amenable location that serves everyone well. And as Commissioner McGriff apparently is already working on. Thanks.
Did they say anything in their submittal that they plan to work with their adjacent neighbors? Did they give a time frame, or is this just, it's all the time? I mean, I guess part of the question I'm asking is, I guess because it's a public document, I want to see what they submitted.
So there's two different things going on. So this is just for what the criteria is and showing you the application. I intentionally didn't read their application because I don't want their application to become a public hearing, because we're definitely not allowed to do that.
Okay, perfect.
And so,
very prudent.
And then I also want to acknowledge it's November 3rd. It's getting colder. They have an application in. Normally we typically have done the emergency resolution for the Father's Heart in the past.
And so I'm happy to do that again.
Yeah, I just want to acknowledge the convergence of timing that is happening, and get some direction from the commission for okay to process this, or it sounds like you certainly have some reservations about what's happening and are looking for us to revise the criteria.
Yes.
We'll have to think a lot harder about how to revise the criteria around safety in a way that is clear and objective, because we haven't found any examples of that thus far, and particularly in the way that you guys are talking about, which is more focused on safety of the public around and less focused on safety of the facility, which is a reading of the House bill. So,
can you link the two? Can you talk about safety of those occupying, and because they're public too?
I suspect this conversation is why the House bill was created in the first part, right? So it intentionally is not looking at those consequences.
I doubt they even thought about this.
Right. So just a little bit of direction. We have staff, we have an application in, we have this obligation to process it, though the timeline on processing is a little unclear. We also know it's getting colder. And so I just am looking for a little bit more direction on how I can support you.
Well, I would much prefer to go the temporary emergency provision, which is what I was kind of hoping and would be the direction that we would go. Obviously, it's up to the father's heart to decide. This is a pathway for them. None of us up here are happy with that pathway. It doesn't make me warm and fuzzy or want to help them out all that much, since they know that we just denied it and have serious concerns, but it's certainly an option.
Can we process a resolution quickly? We already have one created. We just create a temporary time frame, whether the state law likes it or not. At least we've done something in terms of.
So we could convey to the father's heart that we would prefer to do an emergency, the resolution like we've done in the past, of a warming shelter as a temporary measure while we actively work to try to relocate their facility, and see if they would refrain from submitting the application or retract it.
I can more proactively just write a resolution without their submittal that kind of repeats the same stuff as last year, if you would like to see that.
I would.
For November 17th.
I think it's fine, but I think it's up to the father's heart to make that decision.
Father's heart.
It's their decision, not ours.
They have legislation that allows them to submit this, and we have an obligation to process it in some manner.
Yeah.
If the commission, Bill can put forward and we can forward the legislative intent, if you're interested in reading that. And if there are commissioners who have ideas on how to come up with clear and objective standards for will not pose an unreasonable risk to public health or safety, please send them in. We can talk amongst ourselves a little bit to see if there's anything additional there. We haven't seen that yet.
Well, I'd be happy if you send it. Please, hopefully it's shorter than these, and then I will put that as the priority to read that first. Put these a little bit more. Is it really long and voluminous?
Bill, what's?
I really don't know. Certainly we can provide selected portions. I couldn't tell you exactly how long the legislative history is, but we can come up with something that's digestible, I think.
Well, we have an application. We do have an obligation to process it in a timely manner.
Yes.
I don't think next week or the week after that is unreasonable.
Or what? For receiving the document?
Right.
Oh, okay. Commissioner O'Donnell.
I think we're clearly saying that events that represent a threat to public health or safety, criminal conduct, assaults, thefts, creation of conditions that are unsanitary, those are all qualifying events that fall under this. And I don't think we need to make it harder than it is. The people that run these institutions, whatever they may be, need to be aware that they have a responsibility to the surrounding community to comply with the laws of the land. And I think that they need to be stated as an explanatory addendum to that last thing about public health and safety. We state it. Those are clear and objective. If you have multiple assaults going on, multiple thefts, creation of them, those are very measurable events. So I think we're trying to make this harder than it is.
I agree with you, and I think because of the neighbors who have come to us and expressed their opinions, that they know they have linked them to this location. The problem is I could easily see the father's heart saying, look, these folks are not on our property. These events are not happening on our property. You can't prove that that person is associated with this facility and that those two, the call to the police and our facility, are directly linked, and we don't have any proof. And I'm sure Chief Ban could probably say if they show up at someone's house, unless the person says, yes, I just walked over from the father's house, but even then, it would have to be really explicit to have a direct tie. I'm just playing devil's advocate. I just know, I don't think they're going to make the direct tie.
Right. Why else would they be there?
Right. We all know that that's why they're there, and the neighbors have plenty of conversations, but for clear and objective standards, which is what this is going to have to be to hold up in court, I think we'd have to be able to prove that it was safety issues, assaults, like some way of proving that it was directly linked to that location. And that one is where the challenge is going to be.
Well, and it's after the fact, not perspective. I mean, right, essentially you would have to allow it in and then collect the data to then link individuals to a location of assaults or trespasses. That, I don't know how you prospectively do that to deny an application, or they went from Father's Heart to the 7-Eleven to another. I mean, it gets complicated. I'm not disagreeing. I'm just stating that the link of causality is hard in a clear and objective standard to deny something on the potential of an action happening.
So doesn't this legislation require that the facility have 2 years of experience in sheltering? Isn't that one of the requirements for the facility?
Yeah, there are minimum requirements for who can even qualify for this program.
And one of them is that they have, I think it's like 2 years of sheltering experience. So maybe that's an area we can look into as a possible clear and objective standard of, probably unlikely, but how many times was the police called to their location in the previous 2 years in which they have been operating their facility, if they're using that experience as an application criteria. I don't know. We're kind of doing in a meeting what you wanted us to kind of go away and think about, so.
I guess, okay. Tony, what I'm still struggling with is that I'm fixated on the word temporary.
Yeah, it's not temporary.
So temporary means, to me, means, it's a short duration. It's like, I'm going to temporarily do X, Y, or Z, but then after, 3 or 4 weeks, I'm not doing it anymore. So it's not temporary. So provides temporary shelter.
I think it's more, sorry. I think it's more that the temporary is that the housing is not permanent housing.
Yep. It's an overnight shelter. It's an overnight bed, and it's not their permanent residence. Yeah. All right, I think we've beat this one to death. We're all unhappy about it, so we've discussed it pretty lengthy. We're running short on time. Any final unhappy comments from the commission? We don't have anything more positive to say on this.
No, I mean, I think we want to be reasonable.
Yeah.
We're not saying we're objecting to having emergency shelters. What we're saying is that we want some accountability on both sides of this aisle. And we're struggling with how to do that. Again, we're trying to be responsive to the people that put us up here. And I'm not just talking about people in the McLaughlin neighborhood, I'm talking about everybody, because everybody is affected by this. We have to try, I don't want to see us just roll over and play dead. We don't have the option to do that. We're kind of between a rock and a hard place. And, again, if it's, it's temporary in terms of 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. They want to the intent of the bill is to operate these things on an ongoing. Are you nodding yes, Tony? Is that where you're nodding? Okay, because I'm trying to, yeah.
Yep. The type of shelter that's being provided is temporary.
I know some of the shelters that, you can be there for 90 days, but you can't be there for 2 years. That becomes kind of that, it became permanent at that point, after they were there for a certain amount of time.
Not even sure that the language even requires it's a shelter, and it's meant to provide housing and to work on the homeless issue, and that's it. You don't have any say in the matter. That's it. It is as brief and as short and awful as we think it is.
Well, we'll try to send you guys some comments, but let's see what we can do on the other side. We've got smart attorneys. Attorneys represent both sides, so let's see how we can do with coming up with something that gets us part of the way of what we're talking about.
All right. So moving on in the communications, do you have anything else for us, Mr. Holcomb? No. Okay.
No, ma'am, not tonight.
Commissioners, I think Commissioner McGriff, you said you had something earlier.
I said it already.
Okay. Anything else from
Thank you.
commissioners? Rocky, Commissioner Smith, are you trying to unmute? Your thing looks like it's acting funny. There you go.
It's popping on and off.
Yeah, I guess. I would like to congratulate Downtown Association for their Halloween event. It was well attended, and I had a good time at that, and I believe that the community as well did. It was nice to have, I guess that was kind of the second event after the homecoming parade where I actually felt like the community was starting to be able to be a community again. So I appreciate the work on that, and it was a fun event, and hope for more to come soon.
All right, Commissioner O'Donnell, anything from you?
Yeah, I'll simply say on a positive note that I attended the first of the concierge trainings, which is training for those people that operate either our facilities of any kind, whether they be historical houses or museums or whatever. The first session was very good. I enjoyed it. I think it gets our people off to a good managerial start. And if the rest of the program continues on to that quality, it'll be time well spent. So congratulations on a good start. Let's keep up the good work. Thanks.
All right, so the last thing is the mayor communications. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Ms. Turway for 18 years of service to the city of Oregon City. This is her last city commission meeting in the city of Oregon City. Last late night, 10 p.m. meeting. But your service to our community has been professional, always professional, and you've been a great asset, and you will be missed. And thank you for being here tonight and for all of your many, many years of dedication to the city.
I would concur with your statement that institutional knowledge is walking out the door. But we still have you, Tony.
Where she's at. We'll track her
We still have you, Tony.
All right. And with that, I don't have any other communications, and so we're adjourned.